3 rings for the elven kings under the sky. 7 for the dwarf lords in their halls of stone. 9 for mortal men doomed to die. 1 for the Dark Lord on his dark throne in the land of Mordor, where shadows lie. 1 ring to rule them all. The world of Middle-earth from The Lord of the Rings is fundamentally one of the greatest masterpieces ever created in the fantasy genre, so much so that many believe that it created the modern fantasy genre that we know of today. Such a rich environment is only made more vivid and exceptional in scope because of its breadth and depth of interesting and relatable characters. I wish to explore a topic of my own today, protagonism, which in itself is as broad as Tolkien's imagination. From its definitions to its impacts, I believe that something must be said for the success that Tolkien found in creating approachable protagonists in a world so complex that our own seems so pale in comparison. In a story about undying friendship and grand adventure to individual acts of heroism and valiant sacrifices for the good of humanity, this is the study of protagonism and why it is essential to the narrative of The Lord of the Rings. The starting point is simply, what is protagonism? To simplify it down, protagonism is the study of how protagonists function in literary texts and their impacts on a wider society or audience. There is a common misconception that protagonists have to be heroes. They're simply the central characters in a narrative, and so they can be heroes, villains, entities, objects, or even places. Furthermore, some protagonists are active as they cause things to happen. Some protagonists are passive as things happen to them. However, a third section of protagonists, in which I would coin as reactive, have things happen to them and then seek to make amends. This idea is perfectly expressed in a narratology video by Lessons from the Screenplay, in which he addresses the comments of Sid Field's screenplay, A Foundation of Screenwriting.
Sid Field again writes, "If you're writing your script and sense your characters are not as sharp or defined as you think they should be, the first thing you must determine is whether they're an active force in the screenplay, whether they cause things to happen, or whether things happen to them."
Typically in The Lord of the Rings, many scholars point towards Frodo or Sam as topics of protagonism, as their storylines at the heart of the narrative. However, as a text can have multiple protagonists, I believe that there is another story to be told that has a variety of interpretations. The story of Aragorn differs between Tolkien's epic and Jackson's trilogy. The former depicts him as of a claimer of Anorian sovereignty, whilst the latter presents a dismissive and rugged variant, and yet they have the same background, one of heritage and an arc of nobility. Aragorn is a descendant of the men of Númenor, and a direct descendant of both King Isildur and King Elendil, his father. Both fought at the Battle of Dagorlad, where alongside the elves, they warred against Sauron for the good of Middle-earth. That ended partially well, in the sense of Sauron executing Elendil, forcing Isildur to take up the shards of Narsil, and cut the one ring from Sauron's hand to avenge his fallen father. From there, as Sauron was defeated, Isildur's line fell into ruin due to both the ring's corruption and the incompetence of his bloodline and descendants. Both versions of Aragorn possess this heritage. It is Jackson's interpretation that stokes my interest. In The Fellowship of the Ring, it is apparent that the story does not belong to Aragorn, but to Frodo. Aragorn's story is somewhat left in the background, as the plot seeks to establish his romantic escapades with Arwen, and his wallowing in self-doubt. It's only through carrying Frodo and the hobbits to Rivendell that Aragorn becomes more of a staple in his own arc.
If by my life or death I can protect you, at my sword.
It is only once Boromir bites the arrow, 3 of them to be exact, well, it's only once Boromir bites the bullet and Gandalf falls in Moria, that Aragorn finally steps up to the mantle and becomes a confirmed figure of leadership. Thus we can see that Aragorn in Fellowship is a reactive protagonist. It is only because of the death of Boromir, he refers to him as,
I would have followed you, my brother. My captain. My king.
that he accepts his destiny and seeks to make amends. In the Two Towers, this is the time for Aragorn to shine. He becomes a captain of 3 hunters and travels across Rohan to locate the captured hobbits, Merry and Pippin. He listens to Gandalf's advice about Sauron fearing the heir of Númenor, which is why he must step up. He travels to Edoras, a decaying homeland of ruined men, forsaken of hope and corrupted by the grim machinations of Saruman. And alongside the Rohirrim, he takes charge upon the battlefield, in the stature of a king without a crown, or upon the walls of Helm's Deep, with the elves at his flank, against an army of pure darkness. Yet here, he is still reactive. It is only in Return of the King that Aragorn finally succumbs to the weight of his own storyline. By collecting the sword, Anduril, Flame of the West, from Elrond, which differs from the book counterpart as he has it from Fellowship in Tolkien's epic. In Jackson's trilogy, he gets it at Dunharrow before he rides to war with Rohan. Elrond tells him that he must fulfill his own destiny by taking the paths of the dead and bringing back the Oathbreakers to fight against the orcs at Minas Tirith. This is a big step for Aragorn. This is his first step, major step, to taking the crown that he deserves by bloodline and by right. It is only by collecting the Oathbreakers from the paths of the dead and liberating Minas Tirith alongside them that Aragorn fully accepts who he is as an individual and thus a protagonist. This is where he changes from being reactive to active. From Dunharrow onwards, Aragorn causes things to happen. He brings the Oathbreakers from southern Gondor to Minas Tirith and liberates it. It is only because of this action and the Pledge of Allegiance that he accepts who he is as a character. His destiny is one step closer to confirmation. But it is here that he shows his noble qualities, for the arc of nobility requires these to even exist. Through the Pledge of Allegiance from the Oathbreakers to Aragorn, he shows mercy, and instead of adhering to Gimli's suggestion of sending the Oathbreakers to Mordor to kill the orcs and win the war entirely, he allows them to depart from the world. After the siege of Gondor, Aragorn is faced with the choice as the crownless king. He could take up the crown before the threat of Sauron is vanquished, which many nobles would do in his situation. However, it is in this moment that he hosts the last debate and rallies the remaining members of the Fellowship and the men of the West together to buy Frodo time to destroy the ring. Ultimately, this is where Aragorn makes his sacrifice. The Arc of Nobility finds its mark, and Aragorn takes the final step towards his destiny. However, what I find remarkable about this is that whilst it may subscribe to the notions of destiny, all of what happens between the debate and the Black Gate is a result of Aragorn's choices. He decides to put his own life, and the lives of others, beneath the gravity of the ring's destruction. That is inherently Aragorn, as the bonds of fellowship and friendship return at the moment that he charges towards the likely outcome of a suicide mission: death.
For Frodo.
To conclude all of this, I will never claim that Aragorn is the lone protagonist in The Lord of the Rings, as that would be factually incorrect. However, his character arc highlights the benefits of a progression from being reactive to situations and then becoming active in making the toughest decisions. This is why so many of us relate to Aragorn, regardless of his class status. His loyalty to Frodo's quest and to those around him allows us to see him in a light that mirrors reality. He becomes a pillar of what we should strive to be as humans, simply good individuals, regardless of where we come from, or what destiny awaits us. This is only one example of why I believe protagonism to be an important study for developing narratives. In the future I may expand this as a series, including other characters in a variety of mediums, but until then, I wish you all a good morning, afternoon or evening, and hope that you found this either entertaining, insightful, or both at once, because that's all that I strive to do with these sorts of things. Cheers.